what are the main things you're looking for once you go, all right, Skype's over, here's your plan, check back in with me, and like, what is your eyeball going to be on in terms of their check-in?
Yeah, exactly. That's the road you were talking about, right? Now we're traveling down the road, and what does that road look like? Because the first thing that I always see is I see their sheet, right? I've got their sheet. We got all these instructions and all these plans and goals and everything. Here's your trackers. That's the first thing I see. So if I see on there that they weren't compliant with the plan, right? Either A, they didn't track what I needed them to track, or B, they tracked everything and these little markers, these projections that we made were supposed to happen, they not only didn't happen, but they were way off, right? Immediately we got a problem because like Jeff was saying, okay, we came up with this plan, this middle ground between optimal and what the person can do. We're going to have to shift more towards optimal, you know? And then there's usually a lot of conversation that has to happen. Okay, I know you want your pro card. I know you want your striated glutes. Maybe now we need to evaluate how badly do you want those things, right? Because there's always a cost. I mean, this is an extreme sport. And in order to get those kind of things, there's going to be some sacrifice. How much are you willing to sacrifice? And so then we got to kind of start moving from kind of where we were in that middle ground between optimal and kind of sustainable more toward the optimal side, right? But then there's the opposite. There's the opposite where it's like, okay, well, you know what? I don't see anything here except they're meeting my projections. You know what I mean? Everything that we said, while I don't see the data, the projections are happening, you know, and if we see the physique, we can kind of see, okay, the numbers are matching the physique. And while it's rare, that's something that a coach kind of oftentimes has to, gosh, how should I say this? The coach has got to...
Brad, just to clarify, so you mean someone who maybe they didn't track the data that you wanted them to do, but they're hitting the projections in terms of their change in body weight and stuff like that? Okay.
Exactly. And especially a data-driven guy like myself, I had to let go of the numbers. You know what I mean? Because this person can clearly execute the plan without having to do all of that, you know, menial tracking of things and showing me what's happening. You know what I mean? And so there's a lot that happens once we do start getting on that road. And those are just kind of two examples. And kind of the latter example there, I don't have the data, but they're meeting the projections. Then I just give them basically just broad coaching. I'm like, okay, you know what? Eat less food. And they can do it. They can just intuitively almost, I don't know what it is that they're doing on their end, but I just tell them to eat less food and they're meeting my projections. They're making the physique changes that it's almost kind of like a dream really, but that's a scary thing. Like when we're responsible for what it is that they're going to look like on the bodybuilding stage and I don't have my data, I have to kind of let go and put a lot of trust into the client that way. You know what I mean?
Is that a frequent occurrence, Brad, or is that something that's just an outlier that's kind of standing out?
That's very rare.
I have one gentleman.
I can count like on if I was missing my thumb, I can count on my left hand how many times that has happened.
So I'm not a mathematician, but for folks that's either 4 or less.
Right. I have one gentleman that's like that. Like we ran a long cut and he has his own system on his side, but he doesn't like log the macros in my spreadsheet or anything like that. Like basically track body weight and he handles like, we kind of know where his protein should be and that type of thing. Cause we ran a cut in the past, one cut where it was tracking macros perfectly. And then we kind of looped back around, had a gaining phase. Now we're back into another cutting phase. But this one, we didn't track food because he's doing it on his side. So in a sense, he's using his experience, his knowledge base of nutrition, and he's using his own system to manipulate the adjustment. So what I'm doing as a coach for him in a sense now was like in the beginning, it was handling a lot of the smaller details. Like, okay, we need your protein here, fat here. We need to make this adjustment here. Like he's knowledgeable enough now to make those. Now I'm just doing more big picture coaching. Like setting things up. Okay, we're going to take your body weight down to here. These are our markers. Every 4 weeks, we want to be here. and he's just checking in, making sure, like in a sense, he's accountable to me, to this big picture game plan. And so he went through the entire cut and crushed it, but yet didn't track macros. And so he was probably more proud of that, let's say, than just the actual physique it attained. He did make progress, obviously, but he was just like super proud of the fact, like, hey, I did this thing, took my body fat to some pretty low levels while still doing the family thing on the weekends and having my glass of wine and all that. But that's because of the experience level. So, but on my end, it was more like just the big picture coaching, just making sure the game plan was being met. So that does happen, but I don't think it's gonna happen with someone who's relatively on the newer side of things.
Right. And also going back to that whole reactive thing, I imagine both Jeff and Brad, if these individuals stop making progress and you didn't, like, maybe you try some things out of the box to kind of keep the structure in place, like let's do a little more cardio, and we can try changing some other things in your life to increase NEAT. But if we had stalled, I imagine there probably would have been a conversation around maybe we need to actually look under the hood here.
Oh yeah. Yeah. On this particular individual, that's one thing would change was like step count, like up step count, just keep things moving along. But now we're like to a point where like, okay, we're at the weight he wants to be at. He wants to cruise through the summer at that body weight. So it's like, he's like, okay, I can handle the food. I go, but you know what? I think we probably just need to bring the step count down. Just keep your food the same because you have a good handle on it. Just bring the step count down and you'll probably still be able to maintain your weight. And that way your overall demand is lessened. So those are the type of adjustments. So it's more like big picture adjustments versus like being very detail oriented. Yeah. And another thing too, I wanted to mention, like when like you set the plan, like Brad was saying, now it's being executed. After a set, what I tell an individual is like, look, the first 2 weeks, we're just collecting data. Whether we make progress or not, it's not really the highest priority right now. The highest priority is just collecting data. So, because that data is really important for us to be able to make adjustments thereafter. Mm-hmm. So I think like in the early stages, when you're kind of letting someone loose with the game plan, just kind of reassuring them that, it's okay if you're not perfect, because it's going to take probably a good 2, 3, 4 weeks to even just get used to some new protocol. Because keep in mind, coming to a coach, whoever the coach is, I'm sure it's going to be much different than what you're used to doing. So there needs to be, some type of empathy there, like when you do make some mistakes and you're not perfect. But yeah, without data though, like whether it's perfect data, partial data, like without any of it, like how do you make any adjustments?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's that's kind of the challenge, because I have had scenarios where the tracking of the data itself is a stressor. And I think most people can relate to that at some stage if they've been tracking cardio, tracking sleep, tracking nutrition. Like we get some people who are on the pretty extreme end. Some people find a lot of solace and a sense of control in that, but I find that almost everyone has their limits. Whether it's for 2 months after the show and then they're back on track at the very least or not. But it is a really challenging thing when you it's difficult. For me, it's not even just the fear that you mentioned, Brad, kind of going into the unknown without data, but it's also a feeling of insecurity. Like what's my job? Like if I'm not adjusting macros, if I'm not adding cardio, if I'm not doing X, Y, and Z, why am I here? But I think, Jeff, you gave a really good example of, look, like, if someone is managing all that on their own and a system that maybe not be quantitative in the sense that they would actually put the specific macros in the sheet, I do know what's the appropriate rate of loss they should be at. I do know how full or flat they should look. I do need to figure out like what's the peaking strategy once they get lean enough. I do want to check in to make sure that what they're currently doing, although we are losing weight on time and they're getting lean and they're not looking too flat or too full at any given point, I want to see how is that affecting their life stress? Is this sustainable? Are we going to make it through prep? And those are all very valuable things that coaches do. So I think for me, in the scenarios where I have had to deal with that with athletes, it's difficult to remember that and to focus on that when you're so used to kind of like, well, my first job is actually changing the X's and O's. And it's like, well, That's part of it, but actually I don't even think that's the main thing that we do.
Yeah,
You
that we
basically
do.
described what I couldn't in a better way. But yeah, like that was the big thing that I was looking, like the big picture, the nuts and bolts. Okay, like making sure, like the rate of loss was something that I was paying real close attention to, because I know if that's being accelerated too much, then I'm like, okay, there's risk for this person's performance to drop down. There's more risk for muscle loss. There's more risk for him being just like grumpy and moody and all that. So I'm like, okay, let me pay attention to the rate of loss. So that was like one of the markers that I was paying attention to a lot. Plus the feedback, the verbal feedback that I was getting from him, because you can sense like people's overall mood, how they're doing just through how they're verbalizing things.
Yeah.
But yeah, he did a great job at verbalizing exactly what I was thinking, but just couldn't get it out of my 50-year-old mouth.
It's a wonderful mouth.
Well, and really, Eric, you kind of hit the nail on the head there, because regardless of if we have numbers or not, we still are going to have a job. We have to guide this person as far as our timelines go, whether it's competition prep and we're losing weight, or whether it's in the off season and we're trying to gain weight. Sure, we may not have the numbers, but we need to be able to tell this person, okay, in this meso sense, this kind of middle ground sense between where we are now and like 3 months from now versus like a year from now, we need to be here. We need to have this amount of body weight. We need to have you at least taking in this many calories, preferably compared to the competition prep. We need to have you doing this number of sets of whatever body part it is that we're trying to improve. We're almost always going to have a job, because the client is going to need that big picture direction, because oftentimes, and me as an athlete, sometimes I struggle with this. I have trouble thinking about the big picture when my current focus right now is I've got this week of training in front of me that I need to get done. And I lose the context of, okay, I'm going to be peaking like 2 weeks before my next meet, or I'm going to be starting my taper 4 weeks before my next meet. I lose that sense. And we as coaches, we keep our eye on that sense. And we're kind of like in our spreadsheets, we're scrolling up and down and we're looking, okay, here's where we're at now. Here's where we're going to be. And here's all this middle that we need to kind of make sure that we're staying on track with, And so,
the big picture game plan can change too. Like I might set something up. Okay, I got 6 months or a year game plan ahead of me, but 3 months into it, like a whole nother conversation might happen, because maybe there was some insecurity from the get-go. Like maybe this specific person has a hesitancy about gaining weight. They're fearful of it. Okay, well, let's do it. I'm going to take you out of your comfort zone because you never really committed to it before in the past. Let's see if we can actually put some muscle on. Then as they go through the process, they get maybe a little more comfortable with what they're seeing. And now, okay, instead of, hey, we're going to gain for 3 months and maybe just maintain for a little bit there, so you're comfortable. It's like, okay, after 3 months, you're like, hey, nothing bad happened. I'm actually improving in the gym. I like things the way you're looking. So, hey, let's keep it going. So you get a sense of security because you see the game plan actually doing its thing. So big picture game planning, that needs to be revisited every so often, like talking about like goals and where we're at currently, and do those goals need to change, or the trajectory towards the goal needs to change. It's probably a better way to say it.
Well, and that goes right to my here's another shameless plug. I wrote a blog on my biggest my feedback loops from my client that influences my coaching decisions. And what my coaching mantra is that you got to keep in close communication with what are the goals? When do the goals change? When is there doubt that we're not moving toward the goal? You know what I mean? Because oftentimes, this is something that I wrote down. I like to try to convey to the client that whatever you're thinking that you're going to be spending this current phase, it's going to be longer. Think longer. It always goes back to, okay, as soon as you think that you're shredded enough to get ready for the bodybuilding stage, you need to be more shredded. Whatever time frame it is that you think that you need to get ready for the bodybuilding stage, add a month, add 6 weeks. It's going to be longer. And so a lot of times I try to convey to my clients and my athletes kind of the same sense, almost in all directions. You know what I mean? If you think that you need to run X amount of a bulking phase, let's get you to a point to where maybe you actually do feel like you're a little bit fat. You know what I mean? Let's get you out of your comfort zone, like Jeff said. Let's get you to a point to where maybe you've never been before, and let's see what that what that looks like before we start pulling the plug and saying, "Oh, I can't do this." Those numbers, they kind of scare me. And furthermore, maybe we do a longer time frame getting to that number. If you're afraid to get to that 200-pound number, okay, well, let's not get there next month. Maybe we get there in 8 months, and we set up a plan that will take us a little bit longer time frame to get there, kind of grow into that skin, get used to what that looks like, and then maybe that will kind of lessen the scariness of what goes along with that unknown. But don't be too hasty with making changes. So many times I think people's biggest downfalls is like, okay, I need to cut. All right, I've cut for a week. I need to go the other way. Okay, I've bulked for 3 weeks. I feel I don't like those numbers. I'm going to cut now. And that a lot of times that's where the spinning of the wheels happens. You're revving the engine and you're not going anywhere. Take time. It's going to take longer than you think it is, and give time to execute a plan and try not to be too impatient.
I'm gonna interject because Eric's eating, so we're gonna let him eat a little bit here. But I just had a Skype call.
It's the ebook we're releasing with all the recipes. It just got me super hungry. So
there you go. Yep.
Put that recipe in there.
He's eating
Eric.
that recipe, the muffin that I made, and he's or is that a muffin? What are you eating?
we really spend time on this. It's a tuna bagel, but yeah.
Yes.
Got to go in the book. Put it in the book, Eric.
We'll put that one way in the back. But I had a Skype on Friday, and this particular person was interesting because she's wanting to put muscle on, but really hasn't taken to her body weight to a place where I think it can probably go to be like to have a better environment, to make sure like she's well fed, body's a little more pliable, a little more resilient, better recovery, that type of thing. And the history, like when I was asking the history, like what's your weight history? What have you done? Cutting phases, bulking phases, that type of thing. Well, never really going over a specific body weight before. And basically what she was saying is like, I slowly bulk up, but then once I hit that top number, then she cuts back down. So the question I had for her was like, what do you think would happen if you actually stayed at that top number? Like if you just stayed there and trained for like 6 months to a year, like what do you think would happen? Like what did you feel like when you were at that weight? Good energy, that type of thing? Of course there was yes. So like, okay, if you would have stayed in that environment, what do you think would have happened? So to me, it's like, okay, just some people just are impatient, or they kind of just see numbers as like these arbitrary numbers, these phases that we have to run, specific timelines. But I think when I was asking her those questions, she's like, I never really thought about it that way. So there's different perspectives that we can look at with some of the things that we do. And I think like you nail on the head, Brad, with the, like, just being a little more patient and not jumping to like quick adjustments. Because a lot of it sometimes just comes from being a little insecure, a little unhappy with where you're currently at.
Yeah, because a lot of times the goal is not necessarily the real value. It's the destination and getting to the goal. And sometimes the goal is it's a good idea just to live there at the goal for a while. Get to that top number and then just stay there. Don't really do anything to like make that number go down or up. Just try to stay there and live there. That goes to the opposite end of the spectrum too. Sometimes when you make your goal weight at bodybuilding, don't do anything. Just live there, and you're going to see that you're going to get leaner and you're going to get harder just kind of living there for a little while. Now, we don't want to live there forever, but we don't want to be too hasty to start thinking, okay, let's get, more shreddier. Let's get going the other way, and let's just live there for a while, and it kind of rolls back to what I was talking about. Take your take your timelines that you're thinking and add a little bit to it.
That's like in 2006, Brad, when I met you, when I was contest prepping then, I remember what can I do differently this year? And the longest prep I ran up to that point might have been, I don't know, maybe 6 months, maybe if I was lucky. That was actually a 10-month prep. And I just told myself, what would happen if I just lived shredded? Like just stay there longer and just keep dieting. So in a sense, I learned about like how extending timelines out, like taking longer to diet and those types of things. And by the time I did the last show, I mean, I was at my peak, and it was the most, what did Brad say, Eric? Shreddier.
Shreddier.
Yep.
More shreddy. I was more
You were more
I can't even
shreddier?
say that right now. I was more shreddier. Yeah. Basically. Yep.
I love it. Now there's a lot of gold you guys have touched on here. I think to dial it back a little bit, but then to loop in what you just talked about, when you give a client a big picture outcome that you want them to get to, and not necessarily get in there and turn every dial for them and say, hey, in X amount of time, when we get back on topic and we have a meeting, I'd like to see your body weight here, and I think that's a really useful strategy, because now the client needs to figure out how does that fit into their lives, and whether they're successful or they're not, you'll be able to see what were the pain points, what were the barriers, what did work, and then if it was successful, what did you end up doing? What's worked for you? And that can give you a lot of insight into where you want to go in the next stage. So that's one of those things where you're empowering the client instead of just telling them, hey, do X, Y, and Z to get to that point. And you're finding out like what type of structure fits them best, what is individualized for them, which is something you guys have both highlighted to be very important. And I think by giving them an outcome that they need to get to, ironically, it forces them to focus on the process instead of you having done them that for them. And it becomes a very good learning process. And like you said, Jeff, maybe not for someone who's an absolute first timer who doesn't even necessarily know what levers to pull, but for people who do have the knowledge and they have enough experience, getting them to play with different combinations of levers can help them find a more individualized approach. And that's something that almost by definition, we as someone else can't really figure out for them. We can give them feedback, and we can take a look at what they did and see what didn't work, and bring new levers into the play that they might not have thought of. Like you mentioned with your client, who was like, yeah, I know I need to be in cyclical phases of gaining weight and cutting, and that is true. And I know I need to, here's where I start to get a little uncomfortable with my body weight at this body weight, so then I cut. You were saying, well, it's not just about getting to the weight. There's also something to be said for maintaining the energy availability and the environment of what it took to be at that weight, which was a perspective that she didn't have. So I think that kind of highlights to me the interaction between having the client get exposed to learnings and going through their journey, like you guys talked about, but also giving them opportunities in a controlled way that is likely to succeed to push them outside of their comfort zone. Because if they only have a narrow set of things that they're willing to do, then we have a narrow, confined outcome that we know we're going to get that probably won't be better than it has been previously. So it's this interesting thing where we are individualizing based upon what their stressors are and what's going on in their life, but also acknowledging that to build resilience in someone, you have to expand that circle. Because people who really, really just focus on, I only do what I'm comfortable with, that circle tends to shrink over time. Which is not helpful. People get too set in their ways. And I think it's our job as coaches to, like you guys said, keep our eye on the big picture, keep our eye on the timelines, keep our eye on the goal, because it's very easy to get focused on the here and now when you're living in the skin of a competitor.